He just couldn't look me in the eye. He knew exactly what he'd done, and he understood how much I was hurting, as if it was obvious. Brandon wasn't just anyone, he'd been my closest friend since 3rd grade, and he even stood by me as my best man on my wedding day. If anyone knew me inside and out, it was him. To make things a little easier for him, I tried to keep the mood light and said, "Relax, man. Nobody's out here blaming the messenger. Are you sure she didn't notice you were there?" He let out a shaky sigh. "I don't think she saw me. But can I say for sure? No, I can't. I walked in and spotted her right away. I was about to go say hi, but then I saw her kiss some guy, so I ducked into a dark corner. If she did see me, she sure didn't show it." My best friend had just dropped the bomb. He told me my wife was being unfaithful. He'd called me at work and asked to meet for a drink. I knew something was up the moment I saw his face, but with Brandon, it never helped to press him right away. He'd get there in his own time. All I could do was wait him out while we made small talk and nursed our beers. After about 5 minutes, he finally managed to get the words out. "Rob, I hate to be the one to say this, but Barb's cheating on you." Of course, I wanted to jump out of my seat and tell him he was wrong. I wanted to shout, "No way, you've got it all mixed up." But deep down, I knew he wasn't. He'd known Barb almost as long as I had, so there was no chance he'd mistake her for someone else. I asked him how he found out, and he laid it all out for me. He told me he'd ended up on a blind date as a favor for his sister, and, in classic fashion, it was a total bust. After dropping his date off, he decided he needed a strong drink. Since he didn't know the area well, he ducked into the first bar he saw. That's when he spotted Barb, just stepping off the dance floor with some guy. He watched them head to a booth along the wall, and just before they sat down, Barb leaned in and kissed the man. Shocked, Brandon found a spot where he could keep an eye on them. For the next hour, he watched as Barb and this guy shared drinks, danced, and got way too close for comfort in that booth. When they danced, they were all over each other, and the guy was being more than a little familiar. When they finally left, Brandon waited a moment, then followed them out. He saw them get into the back of a car together. After a few minutes, he lost sight of Barb for a bit, and the man leaned his head back, looking pretty satisfied. Brandon didn't want to get too close, but it was clear enough what was going on. Not long after, Barb popped back up, they shifted around, and then she disappeared from view again. At that point, Brandon had seen more than enough and headed home. He sat with what he knew for 2 weeks, wrestling with whether to tell me, until finally he couldn't hold it in any longer. Plus, driving home that night, my head was spinning with what Brandon had told me. I thought back to the night it happened. I remembered I was in Baltimore on a work trip, dealing with a big production mess. I'd called Barb at noon, and she'd told me she was going out with her girlfriends after work, so not to worry if she didn't pick up the phone. Now I was left wondering if what Brandon saw was something that happened every time I traveled. If that was the case, then this had been happening at least twice a month. None of it made sense to me. I'd never noticed anything off in Barb's behavior, nothing that made me think she was unhappy or that something was missing in our marriage. We'd been married a decade, and I thought things were solid between us. Clearly, I'd been wrong. But one thing I was sure of, I had to get to the bottom of it. I knew I couldn't just come out and accuse Barb of cheating based on Brandon's story. That would only start a huge argument, with her probably yelling things like, "I'm your wife. Are you seriously going to believe him over me?" Truth was, I trusted Brandon. He had nothing to gain by lying, and Barb had every reason to cover things up if it was true. On the off chance Brandon was making it up, it wouldn't be hard to find out. I decided to give Barb enough space to reveal the truth, and if she didn't, well, I'd have to look more closely at Brandon's story. Plus, I was scheduled to take a work trip down to our Anniston plant, but I switched things up and got Gary to cover for me. I told my boss the real reason, just so he'd be ready if Barb called the office looking for me. Then, I looped Gary in, figuring he'd understand. He'd just been through a rough divorce after finding out his own wife was cheating. He agreed to help me out without hesitation. I bought a prepaid track phone, and Gary was the only person I gave the number to. Monday morning, I kissed Barb goodbye, told her I'd call after I checked into my hotel, and said I'd see her in 4 days. Instead of heading to the airport, I left my car in long-term parking, rented a sedan from Alamo, and booked a cheap motel room for 3 nights. Around 2 in the afternoon, Gary called to let me know he'd checked into a room at the downtown Marriott, under my name, just to keep the cover story tight. That night, I parked near Barb's office and waited for her to finish work. She went straight home. I gave her an hour, then called on my regular cell phone to tell her where I was supposedly staying. If you call and a guy answers, don't worry. The hotel messed up the reservations, and with a convention in town, Gary Williams and I are sharing a room. I'll check in with you tomorrow. Love you, honey. Bye. I watched the house until after 10, but she never left, so I headed back to my motel. The next day, I called her at noon, just as a reminder about trash day. I've got a dinner meeting with the general manager and production folks tonight, so if I'm late, don't wait up. If you don't hear from me by 9, go ahead and get some rest. I love you too. Bye. Again that night, I followed her, and again she went straight home. I started to wonder if maybe I'd gotten it all wrong, maybe this wasn't her usual routine when I was out of town. Only one more night remained in my pretend trip, and so far, she'd just gone home and stayed in. I didn't call her at lunch the next day, but around 4:30 Gary called and said Barb had left a message for me at the hotel desk. I rang her using the burner phone. Just wanted to let you know I'm stopping for drinks with the girls after work, so I might be home late. Didn't want you to worry if you couldn't reach me. Be safe, sweetheart. If you have too much to drink, take a cab home. I'll be back tomorrow and we can grab your car. That's why I love you, babe, you always look out for me. Love you. Love you, too. See you tomorrow. When she got off work, I tailed her as she drove to the same bar Brandon had mentioned. I'd never been there before, so I kept my car far enough away to stay out of sight, just watching for any of her friends. I didn't spot a single one. After dark, Barb came out, got in her car, and started it, but all she did was move it to the back of the parking lot, into the darkest corner. She switched off her lights and just sat there. About 5 minutes later, a couple of guys left the bar, talking in the lot for a bit, then one of them took off. The other one lingered a moment, then made his way to Barb's car and got in on the passenger side. The two of them slid closer together and started kissing. 5 minutes or so of making out, and then, instead of going back inside, they climbed into the back seat. I know it sounds foolish, but up until that moment, I'd kept convincing myself that Brandon must have been mistaken, that Barb loved me and wouldn't betray me. But watching her and that guy disappear into the back seat crushed any remaining hope I had left. They started kissing again, and eventually Barb slid down out of sight. The man was looking down at her, and though I already knew the truth, I found myself needing to see it with my own eyes. I quietly got out of my car and crept closer, careful not to draw attention. As I got closer, I heard Barb's voice, breathless and excited. I finally managed to get a look inside, and there she was, her clothes in disarray, and the two of them tangled up together. The man's hand was wandering, and Barb was clearly lost in the moment. She pushed his hand away and said, "Come on, I need you now." He fumbled with his zipper and, well, I saw enough to know what was happening. She was urging him on, asking for more, desperate for attention, and he didn't say much, just let her take the lead. It was raw and real, and I'll admit, it was brutal to witness. They carried on, Barb holding onto him, whispering encouragement, and finally, she cried out, lost in the moment. Afterward, the guy finally spoke up. "My turn," he said quietly. Barb tensed and told him, "Not like that, you promised, remember?" He backed off, and I saw enough to realize what was going on. Barb seemed almost relieved. She cleaned up, and I could tell they were about to start round 2, but I'd seen more than I could handle. That's when I decided to let them know they weren't alone. I started clapping slowly and called out, "Bravo, folks. Really impressive. What a show." Barb looked up and, for the first time in my life, I saw someone go completely pale. I'd always heard about people turning white as a sheet, but I'd never actually witnessed it until then. "Fantastic performance, you two. I'd stick around for the next act, but I've got better things to do." As I walked away, Barb scrambled to pull herself together and followed me out, calling my name, pleading with me to wait. But I got in my rental and drove off, leaving her behind in the parking lot as I headed back to my motel. The next morning, I made my way out to the airport, dropped off the rental, and got my car from long-term parking. When I got to the office, Marcia, the receptionist, let me know that Barb had already called at least 6 times, each time stressing how urgent it was that I call her back at work. I thanked her, headed to my office, and the first thing I did was call our company attorney. I asked him if he could recommend a solid divorce lawyer, and he gave me a name right away. I was lucky, the attorney could see me that very afternoon, so I set the appointment. After that, I went into action, doing everything I thought I needed to protect myself. I canceled all our joint credit cards. I even called up the local newspaper to put a legal notice in the classified section, making it clear I wouldn't be responsible for any debts Barb racked up from that day on. Then, I swung by the bank, took out half the money from our checking and savings accounts, and had my name removed from all the accounts, leaving everything else in Barb's name. That afternoon at the lawyer's office, I got the news I expected, but it still stung. Our state was a no-fault one, so everything would be split down the middle, no matter what. It didn't really matter to me at that point, so I told the lawyer to go ahead and start the divorce proceedings. I asked if it was possible to get a restraining order to keep Barb away from me and the house. He said that would be tough unless I had a pretty good reason, so I fibbed a little. I told him Barb and her boyfriend had threatened me when I caught them, and I was worried they might try something for my life insurance. He nodded and said, "That kind of threat can speed things up, but you'll have to prove it at the hearing or it'll be tossed out." I told him, "That's fine. Once I move out, I'll drop it. How soon can this all get done?" "If you're okay with spending a couple $100 for a process server, I can have the papers to her by 3 tomorrow afternoon," he said. I agreed. We made plans for him to call me as soon as Barb was served. After that, I headed back to the office. Marcia had already left, but she'd stacked up 7 little message slips on my desk, every one from Barb, all saying the same thing: call her as soon as possible. I crumpled them up and tossed them in the trash, then sat at my desk flipping through the classifieds, looking for a new apartment close to work. I spent most of the next morning checking out apartments I'd circled, and by early afternoon I'd signed a lease on one. At about 3:10, my lawyer called to say Barb had been served. I went straight to a U-Haul place, rented a moving truck, picked up some boxes, and headed to the house. At 4, the process server who'd served Barb stopped by and handed me my own copy of the restraining order. It said Barb couldn't come within 500 feet of me. A couple of friends showed up, and by 5:15 I had everything I wanted loaded in the truck, except for my clothes. That's when Barb pulled into the driveway. She got out of her car and started walking towards me, but I shouted at her to get back in her car and leave before I called the police for violating the order. "This is crazy, Rob. We need to talk," she said. "No, Barb, we really don't. I've seen enough. Actions speak louder than words. Just leave," I told her. "I'm not going anywhere until we talk." "All right, Barb, I gave you a chance." I took out my phone, pressed the button for the police, and went inside the house, locking the door behind me. She started banging on it, yelling for me to let her in. It wasn't long before a police cruiser pulled up out front. I went out, handed the officers my copy of the restraining order, and they explained to Barb that she needed to move at least 500 feet away. She argued it was her house too, but the officer told her if she didn't leave, he'd have to take her in. I was half hoping she'd keep arguing so they'd arrest her, but eventually, she gave up and drove to the end of the block. I thanked the officer for coming so quickly, finished loading the truck, and drove away. I double-checked to make sure Barb wasn't following me, then made my way to my new apartment and started moving in. I spent the weekend getting settled and then headed back to work on Monday. I'd barely sat down at my desk when Marcia poked her head in and said, "Barb's online too." I really didn't want to talk to her, but I realized it wasn't fair to Marcia to keep dodging the calls, so I picked up. "Yes?" I said. "Robbie, please, talk to me," Barb said, her voice small. "I don't have anything to say to you, Barb. But I need to talk to you." "All right. I'm listening." "I can't do this on the phone, Rob. People keep coming in and out of my office. Please come home, let me fix dinner, and we'll talk." "No, thanks. I'm not coming back. I see no reason to go there." "Then pick a place. I'll meet you anywhere. I just need to talk to you." I let out a sigh. "Honestly, Barb, I don't think it'll do any good, but if you want, you can swing by my office after work. Everyone will be gone by then. I'll give you 15 minutes. That's it. Plus." She showed up just before 6. When she walked into my office, I pointed to the chair. "All right, Barb. What is it?" She looked me in the eye and said, "It's not what I want, Rob. I don't want a divorce." I shook my head. "Well, I didn't want a wife who goes out with other guys and does what you did in that parking lot, but that's what I got." She looked embarrassed but didn't back down. "I'm sorry you had to see that, Rob, but even so, I don't think that's reason enough to end our marriage." "You can't be serious, Barb. You're seeing another man, and I'm just supposed to accept that?" "It's not other men, Rob. There's just one. Jeff. I dated him before I met you. We bumped into each other on one of my girls' nights out, and things just started up again. I've only been seeing him for about 3 months." "What, so you knew him before you met me and that makes it all right?" She took a deep breath. "Rob, have you noticed me being less loving or less affectionate these last few months? I've always cared for you the same. I love you, not Jeff. I only ever see him when you're out of town. I never come back to you after being with him. Oh, well, that's just great, Barb. I guess that makes everything okay then. She shook her head. What I'm trying to say is, my seeing Jeff hasn't taken anything away from us. I haven't disrespected you by bringing it home, and I don't sneak around when you're here. At the end of the day, you're my husband, Rob. You're the man I want to spend my life with. I'm sorry, Barb, but I can't see it the way you do. You say you love me, that I'm your guy, but you're with someone else behind my back. That's not something I can just look past. If you really saw me as your man, Jeff wouldn't even be a thought. And if the reason is that you used to date him, then what's to stop you from going back to every guy you were with before me? Rob, I would never do that to you, she said quietly. But you're doing it with Jeff. She hesitated. Rob, the truth is, Jeff gives me something I'm not getting at home. You're a wonderful man in every way, except in the bedroom. You're sweet and loving, but you don't really seem interested in that part of our life. It's like clockwork, Tuesday and Saturday, once, and then you roll over and fall asleep, and I'm left alone, feeling unsatisfied. I just need more than that, Rob. When I ran into Jeff that night with the girls, I started thinking back to when we were dating and how things used to be between us. Back then, he'd have the energy to go again and again all night, sometimes 3, 4, even 5 times. I couldn't help but wonder if he still had it in him. So when he made a move, I went with him to a motel. Rob, it was just physical. There wasn't any love or emotional connection, just the kind of intensity you and I never had. He gave me what I'd been missing. He made me feel wanted, made me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in a long time. But that was all it was. It never took away from the love I have for you. If I had to pick between you and a lackluster sex life or Jeff and excitement but no real love, I'd still choose you every time. I just stared at her, then let out a sigh. Well, Barb, that's real comforting to hear. Let me ask you something. When you don't feel like cooking and you say, "Can we just go out for dinner tonight?" Do I take you out? She nodded. Yes, you do. And when you've had a rough week and want to get out and blow off some steam, don't I always say yes? She said, yeah, Rob, you do. Actually, isn't it true that I usually do what you ask, most of the time? She looked down and admitted, almost always. So tell me this, why didn't you just come to me and say, Rob, our sex life isn't working for me, and give me a chance to do something about it? You never said a word. My drive isn't all that strong, and Tuesday and Saturday seemed fine to me, you never complained. But if I made you eat hot dogs every night and you got tired of it, you'd tell me, right? But when it comes to something as important as our marriage, you kept quiet and went looking elsewhere. I shook my head, trying to steady myself. It's just great to hear that, if you had a choice, you'd pick me over Jeff. But Barb, it's not your choice anymore, it's mine. And since I have to decide between staying with someone who broke our vows or moving on, I'm choosing divorce. I'll let you have your say, but we're done here. If you have anything else to tell me, you can go through my lawyer. Please just go. She reached out, her eyes full of tears. Please, Rob, don't do this. I love you, I really do. I looked away. Just leave, Barb. Please. She started to cry, but she picked herself up and walked out without saying another word. Plus, the divorce became official just last week. I haven't seen or spoken to Barb for the past 6 months. Truth is, I still miss her. Part of me still loves her, and maybe I always will. Looking back, I sometimes wonder, if I'd just walked away the night I saw her and Jeff in that car, maybe I could have come home, talked it out, and tried to save our marriage. But after seeing what I saw, there was no going back for me. Some things just change you, and after that night, I knew we could never go back to the way things were. But life keeps moving, and so will I. Maybe someday I'll figure out how to leave the past behind for good.